That's Life Unlimited.
Even the mighty might not see it coming. It's prediabetes, and it captures 1 in 3 adults. But you can escape. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test to know where you stand and prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. Be your own hero on smartphones everywhere at doihaveprediabetes.org.
Spectrum News Plus. Local stories, connecting communities. Streaming now on the Spectrum News app and free with your Spectrum subscription.
I'm Sharon Tazwell. Here's your Spectrum News in 90. Israel says it has launched what it calls precise strikes on military targets in Iran, describing it as a response to Tehran and its proxies. State media reported several explosions in the Iranian capital Saturday morning local time. The airstrikes are in response to a ballistic missile attack carried out by Iran against Israel earlier this month. With just 11 days until the presidential election, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are taking their campaigns to the Lone Star State Friday. The vice president spent Friday in Houston, where she teamed up with Beyonce for a rally on reproductive rights. The Harris campaign is calling Texas ground zero in the fight for abortion rights.
This is among the most critical issues that the American people will address when they vote for who will be the next president of the United States.
Donald Trump also spent Friday in Texas. The former president sat down with Joe Rogan, the most listened to podcaster in the country. Earlier in the day, Trump held a press conference in Austin where he criticized Harris for her work on the border.
What Kamala Harris has done on our border is cruel, it's vile, and it's absolutely heartless. Her policy of importing migrant gangs is a crime against our country.
Those are your headlines now. Here's your weather on the ones.
Hey everybody, I'm meteorologist Nate Harrington. As we look at the big picture across the country, cold front moving through the eastern side of the lower 48, providing some showers for the mid-Atlantic states and up in New England by the time we get to Saturday. High pressure in control of the west, and other than that, a very quiet scene, but temperatures warming up over the weekend for many of us. Cool, rain-free weekend as it starts on Saturday. Watch a winter storm develop across the west over the weekend while the tropics stay quiet. More details in your extended forecast coming up.
Welcome to The Big Deal. I'm Errol Lewis, national political anchor at Spectrum News. Every week we look at some of the biggest issues shaping our nation and the road to the White House. We're down to the final 10 days before Election Day, and new polls show a 50-50 deadlock between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, both nationally and in 7 key battleground states. This week, Trump and Harris both continue to campaign across the country in a bid to reach last-minute undecided voters. All but 3 states offer some form of early voting, and so far more than 35 million Americans have cast their ballot. That's according to the University of Florida's election lab. And that includes 16 million people who voted in person. We're going to take an in-depth look at early voting in a minute, but first, here's a look back at the week in politics.
Big part of her resume that she worked at McDonald's, how tough a job it was. Lying Kamala.
The consequences of him ever being president of the United States again are brutally serious. On some issues, we just have to all be Americans and put party aside.
We don't need another low IQ person.
Probably the toughest job in the world, and he's exhausted.
Kamala's migrant invasion disqualifies her from even thinking about being president.
Joining me now to talk more about this are 2 Spectrum News reporters who have spent most of the year on the campaign trail, crisscrossing the country along with the candidates. Cassie Semien covers the Harris campaign for Spectrum and is joining us from Houston, Texas. Taylor Popolars covers the Trump campaign. He is joining us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. And Taylor, during the 2020 election, about 70% of the votes were actually cast before Election Day. That was mostly the result of the pandemic, which caused a rise in mail-in and absentee balloting. But is that pattern repeating itself this cycle? Because it would mean that election election day is not just on November 5th, it's actually every day at this point. Is that what we're seeing?
We are, at least to some extent, Errol. I just got back from a reporting trip in the battleground state of Georgia, where early voting has been going on for over a week and a half at this point, and they're seeing record numbers of people turning up to vote in person just early. They're nearing the 2.5 million person mark, which is just stunning. We actually had a conversation with the chief operations officer for the Georgia Secretary of State's office, and he said they love what they're seeing because, as you alluded to, it's no longer just election day, that there's sometimes weeks for people to cast their ballots early, and we're seeing both campaigns embrace it. On the Trump side, to an extent, the former president has long expressed a desire for Election Day to be the only day where people could vote and that you should do it in person on paper ballots. But at the same time, this cycle, his campaign is begging their supporters to vote early if they can, to vote by mail if their state offers that. So it's kind of a conflicting message, and I've spoken with Republican leaders and voters who say they're a bit confused by it, but we're definitely seeing, like the Democrats, the Republicans try to embrace this new reality.
Okay, so now, Cassie, on Friday, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris campaigned in Texas, a state that Trump is expected to win comfortably, but the Harris campaign chose Texas, I think, for the symbolism. It's the most restrictive state when it comes to abortion, and Harris wants to bring attention to that issue and portray Trump as a threat to women's reproductive rights. What are you hearing from voters there in Texas?
One thing that stood out from my conversation with multiple voters was the fact they actually couldn't recall the last time a Democratic candidate for president came to Texas to campaign so close to Election Day. I spoke with people from across the political spectrum. I talked to a dad who at one point said he voted for Trump in 2016. He was a lifelong Republican, but said his 6-year-old daughter is what made him decide to support Kamala Harris. The fact that he sees Trump as infringing on his daughter's rights if he were to be elected. And that was something that was really important to him, to make sure he brought her here today to support Harris and that he plans to vote with for her. Another woman I spoke with said, when you look at the two options here, it's clear who the better choice is for the country. She said that was why she decided to support Kamala Harris, but she did say she appreciated that Harris was bringing so much attention to the state, even though she won't win it on November 5th. They are hoping that her presence will continue to galvanize people to support Colin Allred, the Democrat running against incumbent Senator Ted Cruz, and that is a really tight race right now. It could go either way, and so they're hoping that Democratic support will groundswell from her presence here today. And experts I spoke with said, this is a smart move. This is playing the long game for Harris. If she were to be elected president, she needs a Democratic House and Senate, and this is, playing that long game, strategizing to try and flip this Senate seat blue.
Okay, so now, Taylor, I know you were in Atlanta, Georgia on Thursday, where Kamala Harris had a star-studded rally with former President Barack Obama and also Bruce Springsteen and the filmmaker Tyler Perry, among others. I'm thinking, in past presidential campaigns, the norm was to chase after endorsements and appearances with senators and governors and, war heroes. But celebrities seem to be dominating the campaign this year. Who are the candidates trying to reach with that strategy?
Yeah, it's definitely a new approach. I think it's an indication of the digital age we live in, and it's a bipartisan approach. I was at that Harris rally in Atlanta, and Bruce Springsteen performed a few songs, just acoustic off a guitar, and was one of several celebrities to be there. Samuel L. Jackson, Spike Lee, Tyler Perry, a son of Atlanta. The night before, I was about 30 minutes away at a Trump rally in Duluth, Georgia, where Jason Aldean, the country music star, came out, and he didn't perform, but he spoke about why he is supporting former President Donald Trump. You think back to the conventions when we saw Pink at the Democratic convention, and then we saw Hulk Hogan at the Republican convention. Apparently, reportedly, Beyonce is going to be appearing with Harris down in Texas, where Cassie is. So these are both campaigns acknowledging that a lot of voters are not, following these races day to day as intensely as we necessarily are, but they are following these celebrities who are willing to get politically engaged. And a voter might see something on TikTok, or they might see a TV commercial, and if it's somebody that they appreciate saying, hey, you should vote this way, that could be influential. Look at the voter registration numbers after Taylor Swift decided to endorse Vice President Harris. So both campaigns are dabbling in that, and I think we'll have some surprises in the final days of this race.
Okay, so now, Cassie, Elon Musk, the businessman who owns X, formerly Twitter, as well as Tesla and SpaceX, has emerged this year as a key supporter of Donald Trump, and he has poured millions of his own money and even hit the campaign trail on behalf of Donald Trump. There's a new Wall Street Journal report that ties him to Russian President Vladimir Putin. What does that report say, and how are lawmakers there in Washington reacting?
Lawmakers in Washington are not too pleased to hear this, especially on the Democratic side of the aisle. Senator Jeanine Shaheen of New Hampshire has already called for the Department of Justice to actually investigate Musk. Investigating Musk is something that Democrats have been pushing for quite a bit of time at this point, so that is nothing new. But on the Harris campaign side of things, right, they're taking all of this very seriously, and that's why, you know, the vice president has been running this race. She's constantly said we're the underdogs. They are taking this very seriously. They're going to be looking into it, but it also is not impacting their strategy. They're going to run the race that they have set out to do, being the underdog, continuing to fight for every single vote, including in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where she is going to be on Sunday, to rally supporters. And President Obama and Bruce Springsteen will make an appearance again in Pennsylvania on Monday to continue to try and grow that support there, Errol.
All right, great updates. Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Taylor. We're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we'll talk about whether Republicans will be able to hold on to their narrow majority in the House of Representatives after the election. Stay with us.
The 2024 election will decide who leads our nation and the balance of power in Congress, impacting all of us. From Capitol Hill to the Oval Office, let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth coverage with our dedicated experts in local politics. Strengthening democracy by informing your community. That's our mission. Available on all of your favorite devices, exclusively on Spectrum.
You never had to worry about what you could do, because you could do anything. Anywhere could be the center of everywhere, and boundaries only existed to be pushed. So the only limit you faced was how big you could dream. What would you do then? Some pretty cool stuff, I bet. Yeah, that'd be some life. That'd be life unlimited.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal. A lethal dose is in here. Who gets it, I won't know.
It's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable. The sad reality is, fentanyl is being mixed into everything now.
More kitchen now.
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
Back with the big deal. I'm Errol Lewis. Last week, we reported on a half dozen or so U.S. Senate races that could determine which party controls the chamber next year. Tonight, we are turning our focus to the House of Representatives, where all 435 House seats are up for grabs. And the question is whether Republicans will be able to retain their narrow control of the House. Republicans are hoping to hold on to a slim majority of 220 representatives over Democrats' 212. 3 seats are currently vacant. But if Democrats win just 6 more seats and reach 218, they could regain control of the chamber, which would give them the power to bring legislation to the floor on a wide variety of topics. While many of the competitive House races are in battleground states, about half of the districts have Republican incumbents, and they're defending them in liberal states, notably New York and California. and they're being watched closely because not only do many of these seats lean Democratic, but President Biden won most of those districts in 2020. In California, Democrats are focused on flipping 6 districts. In New York, Democrats are seeking to win back these 3 districts, which they lost during the midterms in 2022. Joining me now with more analysis are 2 political analysts who are closely watching and reporting on these races in their respective states. Susan Arbetter is a political anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Albany, New York. Amrit Singh is an anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Southern California. And Susan, let me start with you. It was during those 2022 midterm elections when Republicans blindsided Democrats in New York by flipping 4 seats. How did that happen, and how confident are you that New York State Democratic Party has a plan to win those seats back?
Well, let's start with how it happened. So 2022 was quite a wake-up call, Errol, for Democrats. In a state where Democrats have a huge voter enrollment advantage, part of the Republicans' success has been blamed on Governor Kathy Hochul's weak performance in her own race for governor against former Congressman Lee Zeldin, where there were a few factors in play, including Hochul's sort of late acknowledgement that crime was top of mind for voters and that many voters simply weren't familiar with her. But the Dems also found themselves with a bunch of seats in play after redistricting. Now, regarding how confident New York Dems are about winning back those seats, I think it depends on the seat, but there is no question that Democrats appear to be in much better shape this cycle. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn, who we're going to be talking about a little later on, and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, along with Governor Hochul, are spearheading a healthy fundraising machine and ground game. Also, thanks to yet another round of redistricting, NY22, which is right in the middle of the state and includes Syracuse in central New York, is now ripe for the Democrats to flip. Also, there are 3 swing districts in the Hudson Valley. NY17, where Republican incumbent Mike Lawler is facing Mondaire Jones. NY18, where Democratic incumbent Pat Ryan is facing Allison Esposito. And in NY19, a rematch between Republican incumbent Mark Molinaro and Josh Riley. And while there hasn't been that much polling, it does seem like the Democrats have a chance to flip at least one of those seats, but it's a real fight, not just a gimme for the GOP.
Okay, so now out in California, Amrit, Latinos make up roughly 1 in 4 California voters. If you look at the swing districts, they make up an even larger share of some of the most competitive races. Does the importance of the Latino vote give Democrats or Republicans more of an advantage in this election?
Well, Errol, you're right to key in on Latino voters. I mean, across the nation, folks are. And when it comes to the Central Valley swing districts of 13 and 22, more than half of the eligible voters there are Latino. In the Northern LA County swing district of the 27th, which is currently held by Mike Garcia, it's over a third of eligible voters there are Latino. And I recently spoke with Julian Castro, the CEO of the Latino Community Foundation. You may remember him as a former HUD secretary. He now works with this Latino operation here, which did some polling around Latino voters in all these swing districts, found that Democrats are largely doing better with Latinos than Republicans in all these swing districts by a significant margin. That's no surprise ever since the days of Prop 187 here in California in 1994, where there was a lot of scaremongering around Latino voters. The Latino vote has been reliably Democratic here in the state. But this polling also shows that for Latino voters in all of these districts, the biggest issue is the economy. Also, a majority of these Latino voters are concerned about border security. These are 2 issues that Republicans are obviously doing well on in this election season. Former President Trump making inroads with Latino voters also on these issues. So it's certainly one to watch when it comes to these demographics. And also, by the way, don't sleep on Asian American voters in some of these districts, especially the 45th, currently held by Republican Michelle Steele. There's a lot of red baiting going on in this district, Errol, between Derek Tran and Michelle Steele. Lots of conversations about their heritage, whether they're cozying up to socialist China ideologies and Mao Zedong, who will stand up to China. Lots of money going into this district. It's just another one to watch. It's a fascinating time here in California politics.
Okay. You know what, Susan, speaking of the money, if we look at the breakdown of ad spending on House races all around the country, it looks like New York and California account for the highest numbers. And so what are they spending the money on? What are the themes that are important in these House races, especially in New York?
Yeah, I think that the issues are the same nationally as they are locally. Immigration, the economy, abortion, they're the top issues in most of the House races in New York, though there are some local issues that are very important, like local economic development projects, including a giant Micron deal outside of Syracuse. But yeah, the money is pouring in. According to Open Secrets, more than $75 million has been spent by outside groups in New York's House races this cycle, and a vast majority of that comes from those House political action committees that are engaged in simply turning out the vote for each party.
Okay, and Susan, if Democrats are successful in regaining their majority, the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who represents parts of Brooklyn, New York, would make history by becoming the first black Speaker of the House. How has he been helping the party? This, of course, is very important to him. And what should our viewers know about him?
Yeah, well, he's Nancy Pelosi's successor. He worked his way up through the New York State Assembly by being very politically savvy. And he has chosen his fights. He picked Mike Johnson to retain his leadership, not Kevin McCarthy. He also provided increased earmarks, cash for local projects for all of his membership to keep the rank and file happy.
Okay, and Amrit, while all of this is going on, Donald Trump has been campaigning in New York and in California, trying to help Republican lawmakers who are considered vulnerable. In fact, he's expected to hold a massive rally this Sunday at Madison Square Garden in Manhattan. Is Trump an asset or a liability to the Republican incumbents in California?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, Errol, you got to click back to understand why it is that there are so many vulnerable Republicans in this election. And because you think back to 2020, rather, as Susan was talking about, I mean, Biden did well in California, as always, and carried these districts that are now vulnerable. In 22, in the midterm, Californians mad about crime, mad about the border. Republicans overperform. And in all these swing districts, Republicans are going to need to outperform former President Trump. And the polling shows that they are in these districts so far, except for in the 41st Congressional District, a really hot button one in the Inland Empire, part of Palm Springs, part of the Riverside suburbs. That's an area where Ken Calvert is actually underperforming former President Trump. So you talked about Trump being out here and campaigning and rallying. It was with Ken Calvert in part to try and give him some of that Trump effect. But otherwise, these Republicans in some ways are often trying to make a little bit of distance between former President Trump. They know they need to do better. And the data scientists look at this, Errol, and they say the midterm election, lower voter turnout, the presidential election, higher voter turnout. This, they say, will help Democrats across the board in these districts. Also, some recent polling in these swing districts showed that voter enthusiasm amongst Democrats for Kamala Harris higher than voter enthusiasm for Republicans. But as you know, Errol, I mean, all this is going to come down to that day. What breaks these last 2 weeks? A lot of these votes already in process, but we're watching it very closely here, as I know you all are there in New York.
Oh, absolutely. Closing in on the final 10 days. Thank you both. We're not done just yet. Coming up next, we will talk about the Electoral College's role in deciding the next president. Stay with us.
For the millions of school-age children across the country, the state of their schools can have a lasting impact on their health and well-being.
The majority of school districts aren't doing comprehensive regular water quality testing.
As CO2 levels rise in a space, cognitive function takes a direct decline.
We visit 2 school districts working to create safe and healthy environments for their students.
Watch Exploring Your Health, Curing Our Classrooms. Available on the Spectrum News app.
Never have to worry about thinking too big? Because you have a connection that's ready for anything. That's Life Unlimited. That's Spectrum.
I tell my son, I love you every single day. I love you. Now, my dad has never said that to me. Not because he doesn't love me, but because culturally it wasn't comfortable for him. Now now that he's a grandfather, he says, "I love you" to my son every time he sees him. My advice to all the fathers out there, forget the cultural restrictions. They grow up way too fast for you to waste even a single precious moment.
Food isn't just fuel to live, it's fuel to grow. My family relied on public assistance to help provide meals for us. These meals fueled my involvement in theater and the arts as a child, which fostered my love for acting. The Feeding America network of food banks helps millions of people put food on the table. When people are fed, futures are nourished. Join the movement to end hunger, and together we can open endless possibilities for people to thrive. Visit feedingamerica.org/actnow.
Back with the big deal. I'm Errol Lewis. As voters head to the polls around the country, they'll actually not be voting directly for either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. Instead, they will be electing a group of 538 people known as the Electoral College, who will then cast their votes for the next president and vice president. Each state gets a specific number of electoral votes based on population, and it takes at least 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. But what happens if this year's election ends up in a tie, 269 to 269? It has happened back in the 19th century, and the U.S. Constitution has a plan about how to proceed. Spectrum News political reporter Ria Diamante breaks it all down in this report.
Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are running neck and neck.
Guys, we're still the underdogs in this race. It's tight.
Take nothing for granted. You have to get out and vote. You just have to get out and vote.
The winner, of course, is determined not by the popular vote, but by winning enough electoral votes, which are allocated to each state according to the size of their delegations in Congress, which is based on population. With most states consistently going red or blue, candidates are focusing on roughly 7 swing states that will likely determine the results of the election.
And I'm thrilled to be here in Detroit.
It's good to be back in Milwaukee.
There are 538 electoral votes, and you need a majority of them, 270, to win. But it is possible for each candidate to end up with 269 electoral votes, a tie. That would send the election to Congress to decide. The House of Representatives would vote for president, and the Senate for vice president.
They vote by state. So each state has a delegation of a number of members of Congress. Each state ends up with 1 vote.
Okay, another hypothetical. What if the House vote ends up in a tie? 25-25. In that case, the new vice president would temporarily perform the duties of president until lawmakers could negotiate a resolution.
There would be no president, and we'd really just have to elect the vice president and have a vice president sort of standing in essentially on January 20th and remaining there until possibly this can be resolved later or just for the rest of the term.
Electing a president by popular vote would all but eliminate the possibility of such an outcome, but ending the Electoral College would dramatically dilute the power of the least populous states, making it unlikely enough states would agree to amend the Constitution to make it happen. In Washington, Rina Diamante, Spectrum News.
That's going to do it for this edition of The Big Deal. We'll see you next week. Stay tuned to your local Spectrum station.
Friday nights, The Big Deal with Errol Lewis, where Spectrum News' local political journalists break down the most important issues shaping our nation.
Here's the deal. People need a place to explore national issues that have an impact on their community. To understand those issues better, we're bringing together our team of local political journalists from across the country to break down what's happening. So join us every week to catch up on the key stories making a big difference across the nation and in your local community.
Watch The Big Deal with Errol Lewis Friday nights at 9 Eastern, 8 Central on Spectrum News Plus. Available on all of your favorite devices exclusively on Spectrum.
At Spectrum Enterprise, we give over 80% of the Fortune 500 the technology solutions they need to meet their growing business demands. Whether it's ultra-fast connectivity, seamless transactions, safe and secure data, or reliable always-on technology, these businesses demand better. and we're here to deliver it. Get a network you can rely on with our 100% uptime SLA guarantee.
Whether it's our stories, the warmth of our laugh, or our family's secret sauce, we all bring something different to the table. So make some space. The power of connection is waiting right outside your comfort zone. Learn how you can help strengthen your community at belongingbeginswithus.org/teamup.
Our journey towards improving mental health doesn't always present a clear path. Every Thursday on Your Mental Health, we listen to voices across our communities, discussing the challenges of everyday life and presenting accessible resources to guide us along the path to our well-being, providing hope and empowering choices that light the way to a healthier you.
Your Mental Health with Dr. Nicole Clark, Thursdays on Spectrum News Plus, available on all your favorite devices. Spectrum News Plus, local stories, connecting communities, streaming